Engine Adventures, Troublesome Trucks. The first time I worked with the troublesome trucks, they were tricky to handle. I didn't listen to Edward when he tried to tell me how much mischief they could cause. Thomas was tired of pulling coaches. "I want to try something new," he would tell his friends in the shed each night. The other engines didn't take much notice. They knew Thomas had a lot to learn. One night, Edward said kindly, "Why don't you take my trucks tomorrow and I'll pull your coaches?" "Oh, thank you, Edward," Thomas smiled. Edward warned Thomas that trucks were silly, noisy things that loved to play tricks on engines, but Thomas was too excited to listen. The next morning, Thomas coupled up to Edward's trucks, but they didn't want to go. Come on," Thomas puffed, giving the trucks a hard little bump. "Ouch!" they cried as Thomas pulled them onto the main line. Thomas was happy to be doing something new. Come along," he sang. All right," the trucks grumbled. They clattered through stations and rumbled over bridges. The trucks didn't like being bumped and waited for a chance to cause trouble. Thomas soon reached the top of Gordon's Hill. "Steady!" warned his driver as he shut off the steam. Thomas puffed to a stop. No! said the trucks naughtily. Go on! Then, with an enormous shove, they pushed Thomas down the hill. Thomas raced down the steep hill at full speed. The trucks rattled and giggled behind him. "Stop pushing!" Thomas wheezed, but the trucks would not stop. "Huff, huff, ho! You're too slow! We'll give you a push to help you go!" they sang. Thomas could see the station at the bottom of the hill, but he was going too fast to stop. "Cinders and ashes!" he cried. He whooshed straight past the platform. Everyone was surprised to see Thomas pulling a train of trucks and going so fast too. At the points, the line split into two tracks. Thomas turned off the main line and into a goods yard. Oh dear, Thomas moaned. His axles tingled as he skidded along the rails. He was heading straight for the buffers at the end of the track. Thomas was going to crash. His driver applied the brakes even harder as they rolled closer and closer to the buffers. Thomas shut his eyes. But there was no crash. Thomas opened one eye carefully. He had stopped just in front of the buffers. But next to the track was the Fat Controller, looking very cross. "Why did you come in so fast, Thomas?" the Fat Controller boomed. "The trucks pushed me, sir," Thomas said sadly. "You must learn to make trucks behave," the Fat Controller told him. "Only then will you be a really useful engine." "Yes, sir," Thomas promised. The next day, Edward showed Thomas how to pull the trucks properly and keep them in line. When they played their naughty tricks. Thomas stopped bumping them, except when they didn't behave. From that day, Thomas never complained about his coaches again. They were much easier to pull than those troublesome trucks. Engine Adventures, Kevin. Kevin the little crane helps Victor mend engines at the steamworks. Kevin may be clumsy, but he is helpful and kind. Could he rescue a big engine in trouble? Early one morning at the steamworks, all was quiet. Then suddenly, peep, 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 went an engine rushing by. Trembling tracks! Cried Kevin. What was that? That's Spencer's whistle, Victor replied. Snooty Spencer was visiting from the mainland. He wanted everyone to know he had arrived. Victor and Kevin began the day's work. They loved helping broken down engines get back on track. Kevin rolled to collect some engine parts, still half asleep. Clang! Went the parts as they crashed on the floor. Victor shut his eyes. Sorry, boss, said Kevin. It was a slip of the hook. Meanwhile, Spencer steamed to Tidmouth Sheds. Peep, peep! Wake up, lazy bones! He whistled. Gordon was cross. He didn't like being woken up. You need a wash down, Gordon, Spencer teased. See how shiny my silver paint is? This made Gordon even more cross. Thomas set off for the steamworks. He needed Victor and Kevin to mend a crack in his funnel. Spencer steamed after him. Let's race, he said. But Thomas didn't want to race. He wanted to get his funnel fixed so he could be a really useful engine again. Scaredy engine, Spencer teased. Thomas and Spencer arrived at the steamworks. Kevin was so excited that he rolled straight into a heap of scrap. Clang! Crash! Hello, Spencer, Kevin smiled. Do you need a helping hook? No, I don't, Spencer sneered. Big engines like me never break down. Kevin wanted to show Spencer how strong he was, but his heavy load slipped from his hook. Clang! Crash! Bang! You clumsy crane! What a din! Spencer cried. Haven't you got a job somewhere, Spencer? Victor said sternly. Spencer was shocked. He steamed away without a word. Spencer passed Gordon pulling the big express. Peep, peep! How do you like my express train? Boasted Gordon. Spencer tried to call back, but his whistle wouldn't work. He had lost his voice from shouting at Kevin. He's dreadfully rude, Gordon said to his driver. That night in the sheds, the engines were talking about how rude Spencer had been that day. He should learn some manners, said James. But Spencer said nothing. The engines thought he was ruder still when he didn't say sorry. Spencer went to sleep, his wheels full of worry. The next morning, Spencer still couldn't speak. He couldn't ask Kevin and Victor to mend him because he had been so rude to Kevin. He set off to take the Duke and Duchess to the docks. The track ran behind the steamworks. All of a sudden, Spencer stopped with a splutter. He had run out of water. Spencer tried to whistle, but all that came out was a funny muffled sound. Kevin heard the funny whistle and rolled outside. He was surprised to find Spencer broken down. Don't worry, Spencer, Kevin said kindly. We can fix you. Spencer smiled back at the little crane. While Spencer's whistle was being mended, Kevin gave him a long drink of water. Thank you, said Spencer. I'm sorry I was rude. Kevin worked carefully. He tidied trucks and moved metal without a single clang. Spencer took the Duke and Duchess to their ferry just in time. Kevin and Spencer are now good friends. Spencer often visits Kevin, and he never shouts. Engine Adventures, Diesel. This story is about Diesel, who loved to play tricks on other engines. But when my train slipped off the track one day, would Diesel rescue a Steamy? Percy wasn't well one day. His axles ached and his boiler wouldn't bubble. The Fat Controller came to see Percy. "You'll need to go to the steamworks to be mended," he said. "Another engine will do your work until you feel better." The only engine that could come and do Percy's jobs was Diesel. The last time that Diesel had worked on the Fat Controller's railway, he had caused trouble and been sent home in disgrace. But the Fat Controller had no choice but to ask Diesel to help again. The next day, Thomas wasn't happy to see Diesel. Diesel always played tricks on Thomas. "Take these trucks to the harbour," Thomas said to Diesel, "and no silly tricks." "Yes, Thomas," Diesel smiled. "I'll do what I'm told." The troublesome trucks teased Diesel. "Yes, Thomas! Whatever you say, Thomas!" they said in Diesel's voice. Diesel was cross. He biffed the trucks as hard as he could. The trucks crashed straight through the buffers and off the track. Although Diesel had only meant to scare the trucks, he said, "That will teach you to laugh at me." The Fat Controller was angry with Diesel. "You will go back to your own railway," he said crossly. "There will be no more trouble on my railway." Diesel didn't dare say a word. He was glad to be going home. Later that day, Thomas was puffing up a big hill when his wheels began to slip and slide on some oil on the track. Suddenly, Thomas's train slipped backwards, down the hill. Clarabelle's wheels rolled off the end of the track and sank into the mud. Thomas couldn't move, no matter how hard he puffed. They were stuck. Diesel was at the next station, waiting to go back to his railway. He laughed when he heard about Thomas's accident, until he learned that Thomas was blocking the track. "Honking horns," said Diesel crossly. I'll have to help Thomas or I can't get home." Engineers cleaned up the oil and put down sand so that Diesel could grip the rails. Diesel was coupled to Thomas, and wooden sleepers were put under Clarabelle's wheels. "Thank you for coming, Diesel," smiled Thomas. Diesel heaved with all his strength. Slowly and carefully, he pulled Thomas and his carriages back onto the track. "Well done, Diesel," said Thomas. "You have been a really useful engine." Diesel smiled. He liked feeling helpful instead of causing trouble. Diesel pulled Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle over the hill and back to the station. "Good work, Diesel," said the Fat Controller. "You are welcome on my railway any time." Diesel smiled. He was happy to be going home, but was even happier that one day he could come back to work for the Fat Controller. Engine Adventures, Charlie. When a new engine arrived from the mainland, he was so much fun. I wanted Charlie to think I was fun too. But sometimes it's more important to be really useful. At the washdown one day, Thomas had some exciting news. "I have a special passenger today," he puffed to Percy. "I'm collecting Alicia Botti, the famous singer, from the docks and taking her to the town hall for her concert. Percy smiled. Someone else is arriving at the docks today too, he told his friend. Who is it? Asked Thomas. A new engine called Charlie, said Percy. Everyone says he's the most fun engine ever, even more fun than you. And Percy chuffed cheerfully away. Cinders and ashes, said Thomas as he set off for the docks. Could any engine be more fun than me? Thomas smiled proudly as he saw Alicia Bertie waiting to meet him. Then he spotted a small purple engine. That must be Charlie, Thomas peeped. He's very small, and he doesn't look much fun, Thomas whispered to his carriages. The purple engine puffed up beside Thomas. Hello, I'm Charlie, he smiled. Are you Thomas? The mainland engines say that you're even more fun than me. Thomas was surprised. Just then the Fat Controller arrived. It's Charlie's first day today, he boomed. Will you look after him, Thomas? Yes, sir, Thomas replied. Cheeky Charlie blew his whistle loudly. Peep! Let's race to the dairy, Charlie chirped. I'm too busy to race today, said Thomas. Charlie frowned. I thought you were a fun engine, but you're not fun at all. This made Thomas cross, so he agreed to a race. I'll take Miss Bertie to the town hall afterwards, he said. The race was on. Thomas and Charlie thundered through tunnels and steamed through stations. Thomas beat Charlie to the dairy by a buffer, and Alicia Bertie sang all the way there. Let's race to Knapford next, Charlie smiled. Thomas was late, but he didn't want Charlie to think he wasn't fun. One last race, he agreed. But Thomas's driver said it was time to go. Thomas said goodbye to Charlie and sped away. As Thomas bumped onto a bridge, his coupling hook went snap. His carriages uncoupled, but Thomas didn't notice. Where is Miss Bertie? The Fat Controller boomed as Thomas arrived at the station. Thomas felt terrible. Thomas puffed back the way he had come. He met Charlie at a junction and told him the problem. Let's race to your carriages, Charlie chuffed. The winner will be the #1 fun engine. No, Charlie, said Thomas. Being really useful is more important than being fun. The signal changed and Thomas steamed away. Thomas's wheels whirred with worry. Where had he left his carriages? Then he heard someone singing. It was Alicia Bertie. A crowd of people had gathered to listen to her. Thomas puffed backwards slowly. Then an engineer fixed the coupling rod. I'm sorry I left you behind, Miss Bertie, said Thomas, but it's time to go. Everyone was waiting at the town hall station when Thomas puffed in with Annie and Clarabelle. You've made Miss Bertie very late, Thomas, said the Fat Controller crossly. But Alicia Bertie wasn't angry. I've had such a fun with Thomas, she smiled. Peep, peep, Thomas whistled in delight. And his fun friend Charlie joined in too. Engine Adventures, Thomas and Bertie's Race. When a bus called Bertie came to my station one day, he thought he was faster than me. We decided to have a race to see whose wheels could roll the quickest. Thomas was waiting at a station one day when a bus pulled up next to him. Hello, said Thomas. Who are you? I'm Bertie. Who are you? I'm Thomas. I run this branch line. I took your passengers when you were stuck in the snow, said Bertie. I've come to help you today. I don't need help from a slowcoach like you, huffed Thomas. Slowcoach? Bertie gasped. I'll race you. They lined up together. Ready, steady, go! Said the station master, and they were off. Thomas started slowly as Bertie zoomed ahead, but Thomas didn't hurry. Why don't you go fast? Why don't you go fast? Annie and Clarabelle worried. Wait and see, smiled Thomas. He's a long way ahead, cried Clarabelle. Thomas had remembered the level crossing. The crossing gates were down. Bertie had to wait while Thomas and his carriages steamed through. Goodbye, Bertie! Thomas called. Then the road left the railway and Thomas couldn't see Bertie. He had to stop at a station to let some passengers off the train. Peep, peep! Quickly, please! Thomas whistled. Everybody got out, the guard blew his whistle, and off Thomas steamed. Come along, puffed Thomas. We're coming along, sang Annie and Clarabelle. Then Thomas saw Bertie crossing the bridge over the railway. Toot, toot, beeped Bertie. Steady, Thomas, said his driver. We'll be Bertie yet, Thomas's carriages called. But there was a station ahead. As Thomas puffed in, he heard another toot toot. You must be tired, Thomas, Bertie teased. I can't stop. Goodbye. Thomas reached the next station quickly, but he had to wait at a signal. Cinders and ashes, he cried. He had a drink of water and felt much better. Then the signal dropped. Peep, peep, we're off, Thomas whistled. Thomas smiled as he crossed the bridge. Below was Bertie, stopped at a red traffic light. But the light soon changed to green, and Bertie raced after Thomas. Brum, brum! Thomas whooshed into the last station at full speed. Bertie rolled in just behind. We've won the race! Hooray! Thomas smiled. His passengers cheered and clapped. Well done, Thomas, said Bertie. That was fun, but you were too fast for me. Thomas and Bertie are now good friends. Together, they take passengers all over Sodor. The Fat Controller has told Thomas not to race at dangerous speeds, and Bertie's passengers don't like being bounced around like peas in a pan. Thomas and Bertie would love to have another race, but I don't think they ever will. Do you? Engine Adventures. Thomas Goes Crash. This story is about the time I thought I could manage without my driver. I set off by myself one morning and quickly rolled into trouble. Thomas the Tank Engine had worked on the Fat Controller's railway for many years. He had two carriages, Annie and Clarabelle, and his very own branch line. Thomas was a really useful engine. One day on Sodor, Thomas was busy at work. He stopped at Wellsworth Station in just the right place. You could almost manage without me, Thomas, laughed his driver. Thomas felt proud. He didn't know that his driver was only joking. I don't need a driver anymore, Thomas boasted in the sheds that night. Don't be silly, peeped Percy. I'd never go anywhere without my driver, said Toby. I'd be too frightened. Well, I'm not scared, said Thomas. You'll see. The next morning, Thomas woke up early. "I'll show those silly steamies," he smiled. "My driver says I don't need him. I'll go out by myself. Then I'll stop and wheesh to wake them up." Thomas rolled forwards, feeling very clever. But really he was only moving because someone had forgotten to put on his brakes. Thomas tried to wheesh, but he couldn't. He tried to stop, but he couldn't. He just kept rolling along. Straight ahead was the station master's house. The station master was inside, about to have breakfast. "Cinders and ashes!" cried Thomas, and he shut his eyes. The house rocked, glass smashed, plaster and dust flew everywhere. The station master was furious. His wife was cross too. "Look at our breakfast," she said. "Now we will have to make some more." Workmen came to prop up the house with strong poles. Then they laid rails through the garden. Thomas felt terrible. He didn't dare say a word the whole time. Soon Donald and Douglas arrived. "Don't worry, Thomas. We'll get you back on the rails," they called. Puffing hard, they hauled Thomas to safety. Thomas's buffers were badly bent, and bits of fence were stuck to him. The twins laughed as they steamed away. Thomas was in disgrace. The Fat Controller came to see him. "What a lot of trouble you have caused!" he boomed. "I'm sorry, sir," said Thomas quietly. "You must go to the steamworks to be mended," the Fat Controller went on. "Yes, sir," Thomas sighed. "Meanwhile, Diesel will do your work," the Fat Controller told Thomas. Diesel, sir," Thomas spluttered. "Diesel stay in their sheds until they are needed," the Fat Controller explained. "They never roll off to breakfast in station masters' houses." Thomas set off to the steamworks, a sadder and wiser engine. He had learnt 2 things: never to leave the sheds without his driver, and that breakfast was not for engines.